In times of economic distress, the Federal Reserve will often take action, but understanding what the Federal Reserve is and what its actions mean can be really confusing, and it causes a lot of pandemonium. People wonder, what is going on? Why aren't we using that money for other things? Well, in this video, I want to give you a visual metaphor of what the Federal Reserve is doing to help you understand what exactly is going on when the Federal Reserve intervenes in markets. Hi, I'm Craig and welcome to Market Power, where we look at the power of markets and economics to shape our world. And the Federal Reserve is one of the premier economic institutions shaping our world and can be really important. It's actually, when the Federal Reserve is acting, that is the right solution. I'll explain at the end about how our alternative is something that a lot of people would not be excited about. But let me start off with this metaphor. The metaphor is a pitcher of ice water. We're gonna say a bank is like a pitcher of ice water. It has a mixture of water and ice, like that's what makes it ice water, right? There's those two things, both are gonna be in there. But here's the thing, you can't really drink ice. Sure, you can, I'm an ice cruncher. I like to put ice in my mouth and crunch it around, but you can't drink it. A bank wants to have the right composition of ice and water in that pitcher. You want enough water that people's needs are being met at the moment, but you also need enough ice so that way it stays cool, and over time that ice will melt into water and you can still serve people. So you want to have a composition of these two things. And banks typically choose this composition based on their expectation of people coming. They know that every once in a while some guests will come, some depositors will come and they'll ask for some of that water. So they pour that water out. And then other depositors are gonna come in and say, hey, we've got money to put into the bank. And so they know that things are gonna be leaving, things are gonna be coming in. And so they make that composition based on their expectation of people leaving and coming in. Now the problem is when a bunch of people want water at the same time. If everybody shows up and takes their water out at the same time, then somebody's gonna be left without water. Now, it's not that they're without water, it's that some of that water is in the form of ice. You can't, and you don't want to just pour ice into the cup. They wouldn't be satisfied with just getting that ice. So somebody is being left without water. This is the concern that banks face. And hopefully you've already caught at least some of the analogy going on here, but water in this case is cash. People withdraw cash from banks, they put their cash into the banks. Banks hold on to the cash, but the problem is cash just sits there. Cash just doesn't do that much for a bank, and because it's not earning interest. So some of that cash gets converted into other assets like mortgages, other types of loans, and treasury bills, things where they're earning interest on that investment. When a bank runs out of cash, that doesn't mean it's run out of money. It still has assets out there in the world in forms of mortgages, loans, T-bills, all these types of things. Those are out there, but it just can't access them immediately. It can't get that cash immediately because it's frozen. So this is when we say a bank is illiquid or a market is illiquid. The money exists, but it can't be converted. It needs to melt for you to seize that money. And so we have this bank that has the assets, but it can't get access to them right now because it needs time to melt. This is where the Federal Reserve comes in. The Federal Reserve essentially is the water pump. And says, you know what? We will give you some of that cash that you need. We'll put cash into your bank. We'll fill your pitcher up. But in exchange, you need to give us the ice that you have. You need to put that ice up, and you are gonna promise that you're gonna give us back the water in the future, and we'll give you back that ice. But what we're trying to do, what the Federal Reserve is trying to do, is provide liquidity. It's trying to get cash into the banks so that way the people coming to the banks withdrawing money can have it. Like, that's the reason why the Fed needs to intervene. It's not because the banks are in trouble. It's because the people who rely on the banks will be in trouble if those banks fail. That person ends up with an empty cup if that bank cannot fill it up. But if we inject some liquidity, if we put water into the pitcher, if we put cash into the bank, that person's cup can be filled and we can quell some of this panic. Then when everybody comes back and starts depositing their money back into the bank now has cash that it gives back to the Federal Reserve with interest. It's a loan. They're paying the Federal Reserve for this intervention, and the Federal Reserve will put the illiquid assets back into the bank. And this is great. This is what we want. Today we have a lot of concern about billionaire philanthropists, that a billionaire comes out and starts funding things or starts solving a problem that the government couldn't solve, and people say, well, if we could tax that billionaire, the government would have the money to solve these problems. That is why the Federal Reserve exists. We literally relied on billionaires to save our financial system in the past. Panic of 1907. The system is collapsing. JP Morgan, as in the billionaire who the current bank JP Morgan is named after, he was coming in. He's like, look, the government can't help anybody. I will use my resources. I'll call up my other billionaire friends. We'll come together and we're going to save the financial system. And he did, and everyone was excited about this until they realized, holy crap, a billionaire has total control over the financial system. We shouldn't let that happen. And so then the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 comes in and establishes the Federal Reserve, a place where the government or a government institution has some ability to respond to these crises. If we're people hating on the Fed and hating on billionaires going and doing philanthropy work, they can't coexist. You need to realize that this is the solution. This is a government solution to these liquidity problems, and it's worked pretty well in recent decades. Now, it also caused the Great Depression, and so that's a story for another day. But if you're interested in more of this information about what's going on, you can check out my lecture on the Panic of 1907, or you can even look inside the Federal Reserve and learn a little bit more about that institution. Stay tuned for more episodes of Market Power.